Good call. Thank you so much, Sydney. Yeah, so never done the whole live thing. Um, Thought I'd make some time for availability if there's any questions. And also, we'll pull a Koan card for you if you're interested. So, since there's just a few of you and we're just kind of hanging out, go ahead and start popping those questions. And to get started, actually, I'll pull a card just to start. Okay. So this is what the cards look like. And it can be a koan or it could be just a basic form of inquiry. And this one says, I don't know how well it focuses. What wow is here? Some of these are a little bit more pithy than others. So, how's everyone doing on the path? Does anyone have any burning questions that they would like to ask? So, the yesterday I had someone I work with had come to Colorado from Denmark to go to a good friend's wedding, and I was able to meet up with him in Boulder, and we had a pretty spectacular day with just loaded with synchronicities. And one of the things that came up is an insight arose for his name is Oscar, and he was speaking of yoga in particular. And he had studied yoga at the ashram with Sadhguru, and there was a specific methodology in which it was practiced. And even though he eventually came to a place where that didn't really resonate with him, his insight was while doing yoga, there is not a disassociation, but a disidentification with the body, and there is something energetic that seems to remain. And in that, he can be sitting completely still in a state of stillness and still have the same experience of doing these poses with yoga. That is a pretty powerful form of stillness and really does point toward non duality. And if any of you have ever done any Qigong, higher levels of Qigong is very much the same. A lot of the motions that are learned initially are usually considered beginner Qigong. And ultimately, that opens up into something that's a little bit more sensational, where one can be sitting, not necessarily in a state of closed eyes meditation, but in natural meditation and still be experiencing those energetic signatures. So that's pretty interesting stuff. It was a pretty interesting day. So, does anyone have any questions they'd like asked, or does anybody want a Koan card pulled for them? Let's check the chat. Here we go. Oh, that's good. So Mike asks, what's the difference between koan and inquiry? Um, Inquiry seems to be a lot more pointed toward uncovering something, and koan is almost like mu itself. So it's not as pointed, or it doesn't necessarily provide clues. Um, Koan seems to be a little bit more about tapping directly into that which is non-dual or not orientable. So inquiry, most of the time, when it's a early on, it tends to be who am I, where am I, things along those lines. And then that can start to settle into something that's a little bit more natural, where it's almost intuitive as inquiry comes up. And those of you who are familiar with Byron Katie, that inquiry turns into something along the lines of, is it true? Has it always been true? Will it continue to be true? And then from there, we find that inquiry becomes really powerful, almost as just a simple state of observation, watching thought from a distance without needing to interact in any intellectual or mind identified way. But that's a pretty good question. Koans are intended to, sometimes anyway, confuse the mind or confuse the processes of cause and effect. And some people, in the midst of attempting to parse or figure out a koan, will have a complete vacuum of thought. And in that space, what remains? And that's essentially what we've all been pointing to. All right, Mike, I'll pull you one of these cards. Yes, and it's a loose name, Koan card. Some of these are just inquiry. Some of these might have more of a feel of a koan. They're all intuitive and just kind of came up at some point. This one's good. Mike, this one says, there is no origin. And that particular pointing is fantastic because of just the nature of the mind having a cause and effect relationship, or a seeking of origin for almost every experience. If we can find a way to let go or let be an origin, we enter into a space where we find that we can just simply be with the effect. And the best way to describe that is, this here right now is the effect. And even though it's not really the effect, that can be a gentle way to experience presence. In other words, no need to search for cause, no need to discover origin, just this right here, right now. This is the effect. All right, Sydney. Yes, I will pull a card for you. And for people that are just showing up or haven't seen it, it's kind of a cool artwork. All right. Oh, this one is a really good one. This one says, say and feel, I don't know, I don't need to know. That's, after meeting Angelo, that was one of the very first insights that kept coming up in a, almost as a spoken thought when there wasn't a lot of thoughts there. And, sharing the experience with friends, family, and other people, there was a lot of people really eager to share. Hey, you should watch this documentary, or have you read this book? And it wasn't necessarily a rejection of those suggestions, yet for the first time in existence that this character can remember, there was a sense of, I don't need to know. I don't need to know anything else. I don't know, and I don't need to know. And that really took pressure off of almost this state of rumination and reflection that can tend to happen through experience. We find ourselves, when there's mind identification, a sense of anticipation or expectation on one side, and a sense of rumination or reflection on the other side. And even though they're all kind of connected to some sort of reflective thought, it tends to stretch our experience in time out and pulls us away from the present moment. So an inquiry along with this is of saying, feeling, I don't know, I don't need to know, is something along the lines, is a thought necessary before the event, before the experience? Is a thought necessary after the experience? And that ultimately naturally leads to, is a thought necessary here and now? All right. Is it pronounced Kumi? I will pull you a card. This one's good too. Another requirement. Does a memory need to form? That can be a really powerful form of inquiry there too. Does a memory need to form? Does this need to be recorded? Does this need to be referred to beyond this moment? Or can I be so immersed in it that maybe there's no future that I can reflect on this moment? And for any of you who have been completely immersed in the present moment, it seems as if memories don't really form in the same way. Maybe it almost comes across as like a sensation or maybe a notion. And so if there's a fixation toward memory, if there's a fixation toward experience, and this is something that Angelo points to as well. We don't need to be collecting experiences. We don't need to form a memory. And this can show up with these things too, that do we need to take a picture of all of our experiences to reflect on them in the future? Or can we allow ourselves to be so completely immersed that no memory or no recording of this needs to be formed? So that's an interesting one too. Who else wants a card? These are good ones, by the way, so far. Pretty amazing. And you're welcome, Sydney. I can even just keep kind of pulling them at random, although, the interaction seems to be valuable for people. All right, there we go. Oh, hey. What's up, Graham? How you doing? Oh, Keith, what's up? We got some members in the house. All right, Graham, let's get you this one. All right, so this one will lean a little bit more toward a koan. So the most important thing is if some of these, if they come in a question form, it's it's not intended to be answered. It doesn't have to be answered. Pay attention if to see if the mind is grasping or reaching for some sort of orientation to this. This one here, I'll show you this side again. This one says, "What meaning do you place on nothing?" So that one leads a lot more toward a koan, and there needs to be no answer. These can be great inquiries just to sit or maybe throughout the day dynamically ask this question gently. What meaning do I place on nothing? And it see if something shows up. And if it does, doesn't necessarily need to be analyzed, but sometimes what that will lead to is a complete vacuum of thought. It can be tricky though, because inquiry can become a fixation. It tends to reach a threshold for a lot of people. And there is a point where we let go the active aspects, the aspect that feels like agency when it comes to inquiry, and we move to a state of just observation. So see if something comes up if you ask, what meaning do I place on nothing? Sometimes just asking that question, it will lead to just a quitting. Angelo was telling a story recently that was pretty funny. He said that he was having, I think it might have been a group session, and he just simply looked right into the camera and said, "Stop thinking. Just stop. Just stop right now. Stop thinking." And whoever was on the other end asking the question had a moment of complete clarity. Even though it didn't last very long, that gap by itself can be something that's absolutely felt, absolutely sensed, but it just can't be parsed in the way that the mind wants to create a cause and effect relationship. So, how powerful is that just to hear stop thinking and have that happen? It's kind of cool. All right, Keith. Nice to see you here, my friend. Keith is one of the few people that I've been able to meet in person. All right, Keith, here you go. The ultimate paradox. Nothing is everything. And apologize about the lack of focus on the camera. That's a good one. Nothing is everything. Everything is nothing. Emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. All right, who do we have? Is it Kukubala? Nice to see you. You asked, how do we know that we are at that threshold? So this inquiry can be really tricky. I think that's what you're asking. How do you know that you've reached a threshold with that? If you've spent doing inquiry for a certain period of time, and it's been at least a 28-day period or a month or so, and inquiry doesn't seem to be yielding the same effect that maybe it was previously, it's likely that a fixation has formed. And this is just the tendency of the identity. It seems as if we create what we could just call a sacred cow, something that we hold as, oh, this is the way, this is the truth. And then down the road, that sacred cow might be replaced with something else. So it could start as inquiry, or it could start as meditation, it could start as yoga, it could start as prayer, I mean, mantra, any of that stuff. And that's basically taking a position. And eventually we will get to a place where instead of replacing that sacred cow and replacing that position of this is the way, this is the correct way, we begin to look at the sacred cow itself. Does there have to be a replacement of that sacred cow? Does there have to be a position? And once we start to look at that, things start to unfold a lot closer to home. And we can find that it gets rather subtle there. And so to know that we're at a threshold is just simply if it feels like struggle or effort for an extended period of time, usually about a month seems to be the case. It's a good idea to let it go and just break the fixation to that pattern, break that particular habitual inquiry. And it doesn't mean that to let it go now doesn't mean that it won't come back. Yet it gives us an opportunity to continue immersing ourselves into this inertia that seems to be here with life itself, the inertia, the natural motion and dynamism of this transitory universe. So to let inquiry go, sometimes it comes back in a natural way or it returns in a way that's somehow transcended. And that's kind of the name of the game, to continue moving forward, moving out of what seems familiar into, or out of what seems comfortable into something that is absolutely unknown. The practice of engaging in the unknown in a outward or action oriented way can reveal a lot about what mechanisms are at play here. The one thing that can be said is if you can recognize a pattern within yourself, any kind of pattern, no matter how small or mundane it may seem, give yourself the opportunity on a regular basis to see what it's like outside of that pattern. So here's an example. Working with an older gentleman a few months ago, he had a very specific pattern of when he woke up in the morning. He would do something in particular, read a newspaper, make himself some coffee, and then go for a walk or whatever his pattern was. It was very, very specific, and this had been going on for about 30 years, exactly in this way. So the only pointing that seemed to arise was, well, what if you don't make coffee and you don't drink coffee tomorrow morning? What would happen? And he's like, I don't know. And the second session after that, he reported that just not having that morning coffee sent him into a space that felt like a spiral of thought and sensation. And it was just a representation of that's where identity wants to linger. It lingers in where we seem to feel comfortable, or it lingers in where we seem to want to be hiding something it shows up in a habitual way. And so if you can identify any pattern in life, give yourself the opportunity to play, explore, or experiment outside of that pattern and see if there's anything there. If nothing shows up, then it's not the type of pattern that keeps us identified. It's just probably in transit anyway. Yet most time we will find that it triggers something, and that gives us an opportunity to watch thought and sit with sensation. And every opportunity we have for that, we eventually kind of move into this state of becoming comfortably uncomfortable. We become acclimated to just this space that seems absolutely unknown, and it can reveal quite a bit. A lot of insights can arise there. So, good question. Hey, Jade. Let's see. Graham says, I love that. Yeah, it leads to just complete empty presence. Absolutely. It sure is. Let's see. Kumi says, I feel confused by the senses when trying to feel presence or stillness. They seem to define all of the experience. Yes. So this is with a grain of salt, of course. The senses themselves, they're simply just a gateway. There is something about the body itself. We can put it this way. Maybe it's metaphorical. Maybe there's no certainty here. Although it seems maybe that the body's interpretation of this energetic space that we call reality, it seems to be sensation. That these sensations don't really seem to have an origin. They don't really end anywhere. They just kind of ebb and flow in this just very strange emptiness, form, emptiness kind of experience. By staying in sensation, what begins to happen is we're able to step outside of that box of thought and watch thought from a distance. So a metaphor that's come up previously that you may have heard is there's an old man and he's outside yelling at the rain, asking it to stop. From a distance, watching that old man yelling at the rain, screaming at it to stop, that can be kind of funny or amusing for us. Yet if we put ourselves in that old man's shoes, or in his position, that's what suffering looks like. That metaphor applies to thought as well. If we allow ourselves to be completely immersed in the sensory space, then we're able to watch thought from a distance. And by doing so, we may see beliefs or other particular habitual thought patterns. And watching them at a distance gives us the opportunity to see them and not identify with them. And there can be quite a bit revealed there. In fact, sometimes there are thoughts revealed that we wouldn't otherwise see because we're kind of caught up in the storm of what seems to be this conceptual thought space. So it can be tricky though, because some people can end up getting a fixation to the body and sensations itself. Yet I will say on the most part, what is really clear is the majority of human beings are essentially doing everything they can to avoid feeling certain sensations. And you will see that in triggered behavior, compulsive behaviors, impulses, in just a general sense of resistance and avoidance to those sensations. There are some people though that are have learned to somehow identify with the body in these sensations, and that can become another fixation. Although I will say, up to this point, working with I think it's about 400 people globally since I began this, I have not met one person that has had that direct experience. If that is the case with you, and you feel like these sensations are something that are being identified with, check in for thought again. Um, Sometimes they're really quiet, but it tends to be still thought oriented. And then from there, being in the sensory space, we tend to be extremely present. It's really our only natural compass of presence. We cannot think ourselves into presence because all thought is reflective, yet we can feel presence. And even though it's a slight interpretation through the body of what this is, what this moment is, it is almost instantaneous. And from there, it seems as if this begins to unfold on its own to be completely engaged and immersed in this sensory space. Adyashanti points a lot to stillness. And it seems like stillness is initially discovered in meditation. We we sit, we become kind of aware of these senses, and then we're able to watch thought. And then eventually we take that off the mat. Stillness seems to be complete and full engagement with the presence here and now, awareness. But even those are just words. The senses themselves, these sensations we feel in the body, they're very specific, palpable, and tangible for us. That is a very strong indication of something that we can hang with. Now, it doesn't tend to stay there, yet it does tend to bring us to a space that we could call emptiness, complete awareness, and our attention seems to expand in a state that is no longer isolated to a center and somehow flips inside out. Attention becomes really wide and really vast. And that right there is a very powerful first taste of no self, because it's very difficult to identify a center to anything. In fact, it gets to a point pretty quickly that there's nothing that we can orient to at all. That is a space of being aware of thought, being aware of sensation, and being neither. And then from there, possibly or often, a sense of nothingness, which can't really be described in words. Yet you just know when you know that there's no thought in that space. There's no sensation. There seemingly nothing seems to exist at all. So that's a pretty good question, though. Let's see. I'm kind of stuck as observing thoughts leads to dullness. The alternative is getting lost in thought. How would you suggest? From here, so inquiry or observing thought is one thing, but what can happen is if we're observing thought, we can still end up in a space of very low level thought, or what we could call listening or listen for the whispers, these very quiet thoughts that are underneath things. And that dullness that you may be experiencing there is probably still filled with thought that are just not very conscious. They're not very top of the mind. And that particular space can actually still be considered a form of disassociation. So the most natural pointing here is to go right back to the body and feel whatever seems to show up. If it seems nebulous or there's nothing really there that seems specific, go right to the breath, whatever is physical and tangible, and feel every tiny, minute aspect of the breath. You feel the temperature as it moves through the nose. You feel it course all the way down into the lungs. You feel the lungs expand, and you feel, the diaphragm moving and contracting. And just every step of the way, be that close with the breath. And it becomes a lot more difficult for thoughts to attach to that experience. And you don't end up in this limbo space that feels dull or like nothing seems to happen. I hear about this often. It's a mild form of disassociation because there are still thoughts present, but they're not very strong or very, very loud. Here's what a lot of you will find. You spend a lot of time in this physical present state. Sensations are definitely primary, mainly because our primary beliefs seem to be associated with these sensations that we assume are sadness or whatever else, right? This is anxiety, this is sadness, this is loneliness. That's still an assumption. Underneath it, what is the exact sensation? What are the individual aspects of that sensation? How fully can you experience everything? Is it moving? Does it have a color? Is it changing? Does it have a temperature? Is there a texture present? Does it make a sound? Getting so in touch with that will help kind of let that interpretation and that assumption peel away. And strangely enough, it's almost as if we forget what the interpretation of that sensation was. It takes us on its own journey, and we find ourselves absolutely present, away from thought there. Let's see. What's up, Josh? Great to tune in following our session earlier. Hey, what's up, Matt? Nice to see you. Yeah. Let's see. What is the most embarrassing thing, at least apparently for others, you can say about yourself? Be honest. Uh, if you don't want to say it, can you say why? Oh, yeah, embarrassment. Embarrassment seems like an old feeling, or hmm, almost a dream. Don't know what the feeling of embarrassment is. Here's one thing I can say: humiliation and the sensations associated with vulnerability seem to be the same exact sensations, but the ones that are associated with humiliation, there's a lot of thought there. Vulnerability, on the other hand, same kind of sensation. It's like this opening, like this. A lot of people will describe humiliation as I'm losing myself, or I'm pulling apart, or something like that. I'm dissolving. Um, that there and it could also be a contraction, actually, but they actually tend to be the same exact physical sensation. One is just much more identified than the other. Jade wants a card. All right, this one came up for you. Let's see, is it more focused at this distance? This one says, what are you outside of thoughts? That's exactly what we're exploring. What are you outside of thoughts? And as before, there doesn't need to be an answer. And if there is, hopefully it's I don't know. That's a that's a much more honest answer than something that comes across as certain, for sure. This morning, I focused my attention on sensations. Um, there were some low level thoughts directing. Suddenly, intuition began to flow about the situation we spoke about. This took me away from sensation. Um, Look, there's really no fixated place to go. So even sensations can become a sacred cow, a stance. For a while, though, what this exploration is mostly about is to witness firsthand, in the midst of the moment, how these sensations are being interpreted by thought, and how that seems to be modifying or overlaying the experience. That by itself, just on a regular basis, become very aware of how these sensations absolutely have no meaning. They don't compel us to do anything. They're just there, being sensations. And the thoughts are essentially using that as fuel to direct some sort of action, some sort of compulsion, et cetera, et cetera. So if intuition takes you elsewhere, then follow intuition. Absolutely. I mean, I've said this before, and this can be misinterpreted, especially by those who uh, are a little bit more on the radical side of non dualism. But there is no truth but your truth. Just make sure that that's true. And I know that that sounds like, well, there's no me, there's no I. How can that be? Whatever your direct experience is the truth. If there seems to be an I present, if there is an identity there, that's where we stay. It can be really irresponsible for a teacher to point. Imagine coming into a session and I say, there is nothing, nothing exists. There's absolute emptiness, and that's all there is. The rest of this is an illusion. Good luck. That doesn't have a lot of skill. That doesn't have a lot of compassion. So to meet all of you exactly where you are is to allow you to see what your experience is, and maybe for the time being there is a truth of there's identification here, or there's emotion that has label, or there's these particular dramatic instances in the external world. That's okay, because we have to be with whatever it is that seems to be true for us in every instant. The whole point of this, though, is to continue examining how true that is. So the statement is, there is no truth but your truth. Just make sure that that's true. The secondary part of that statement is most crucial. Is it true? And examine it. Is this actually a sensation? Does it actually have a location? Is this actually sadness? Are you a broken person? Are you incapable of waking up? Are these doubts true? To continue uncovering and just turning it over and allowing ourselves to enter into a state of curiosity so that that drives the experience. And then there is no particular place that we don't explore, especially those that we've already explored seemingly in the past. And what begins to happen is it's layer by layer by layer. We begin to find that maybe there isn't nothing, there's no one here, but it also is kind of a precarious dance in this paradoxical way between what seems to be, and seems is the operative word here, relative reality, this reality of form, this reality of objects and doing and relationships and jobs, so on and so forth, and an absolute reality. They seem to coexist and they don't seem to have a very powerful dividing line. Um, it's not like oil and water itself. So those particular things, as we explore continuously, allowing ourselves to explore in a really open and honest way, these things just become revealed naturally for us. And really, the sensational space, once again, these sensations is just a really nice platform because it's something that's always been there, and it's something that the identity always wants to pull us away from because it has all this meaning. This is going to kill us. This is going to hurt us. Very strange. All right, let's see. All right, Patrick would like a card. This one's good too. So, in the exploration of sensations or anything, the exploration of finding a boundary can be actually rather illuminating. This one says, can you find a boundary between here and there? And that one can be done. That particular exploration can happen in the sensory field of sight, the visual field. It can happen with sound. For those of you that are familiar with Angelo, he has a lot of meditations or inquiries around, is there actually a discernible sound or is it one sound? And that's finding the boundary. Is there actually a boundary? Or is reality actually broken into these tiny little pieces, these individual separate pieces, or is there something here that is a singular experience? All right, let's take a look. Wasn't sure whether to allow the intuition to flow or return to sensation. Yeah, this is really all about flow in general. So, pardon me. If intuition arises, then that's what there is. And then that's, and especially if it is intuition, a good way to have a sense of if it's intuition or if it's being co-opted is simply if it seems really clear that there's a reason why, or it's related to something else, or there's a cause to an effect, it's not likely intuition. It's being co-opted. Intuition tends to be very spontaneous, immediate, and doesn't seem to have any relation to anything else. It's just a knowing that knows that it knows that it knows. So as long as it's actually intuition, always follow intuition. There is no truth but your truth in that sense. Hi, Kathy. All right, let's see. What is sleep and dreaming like for you? Thanks. Sleep and dreaming. Sleep and dreaming is interesting. There are times where it's really there's these. It's definitely different. Um, Usually, only 4 hours of sleep is required a night. Sometimes more, sometimes six. There's times that the body's wanted to sleep for 12 hours, and that's just what happens. Yet, on average, it just seems like 4 hours is about all that's required. There are points in sleep where it's interesting. There's like a state, it feels like, of consciousness, and maybe it's like stepping away from deep sleep into that twilight period or that twilight place right before we wake up or right after we begin to go to sleep or before we go to deep sleep. It seems like sometimes that can be an extended period of time, and it's really interesting because it's just this it seems like an ongoing elongated experience that really steps into just impossible to pin down um, color, motion, sensation. Some mornings or evenings I wake up and I'm the wall is what it's like. So it's like being in this theta brainwave state or this twilight period for very extended periods of time. In terms of dreams, I mean, um, they they come and go, and sometimes they're really interesting. Sometimes they're about this exact thing that we're doing here. There was one where I supposedly had left this particular dimensional plane and met a copy of myself in a dimension where there is no spoken language, that all communication is like telepathic. This one's pretty funny. And so running into myself, there was like communication happening, but it was all mental. And I'm like staring at this mirror image of myself in this other dimension. And the only thing that was said is, you already know, and that's enough. And that was it. That was the message. So not a lot of meaning put on it. It's just kind of seems like another playground, really. Mm. Good question though. Can you please sing us a song? Happy birthday. I'll let you pick one of your favorites. Let me handle questions and things like that first. One can dismiss all they know about awakening. Path is thought, and then there it is again, that dullness. The intention to awakening is also seen as just sensations. What? Hmm. Can you clarify a little bit? Um, most most of this, when it comes to suffering or identification, will really show up in thought. There can be low level fixation in thought that we just don't realize or that we're not aware of that can show up. The whole point of this is to continue uncovering that which remains hidden. So a way to put this is, the identity itself, as long as it remains hidden, will continue to operate behind the scenes. It's very much Wizard of Oz. The identity is saying, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And so as long as it remains hidden, these mechanisms at play, we tend to automatically identify with these things, whether they be compulsive behaviors, compulsive or intrusive thoughts, so on and so forth. And that is really the nature of belief, that these things that we don't ever even question are the things that kind of run our experience. And so really it's about questioning everything in a way, yet being careful not to over intellectualize that or make that an intellectual practice, to essentially question everything that seems to be a belief and allow that to settle into something that's much more still. So, yeah. Um, any other questions? Anybody else want a card? All right, cool. Well, this was kind of a fun first live. I appreciate all of you for being here. I will pull one more card for everyone before we take off. How's that? Let's see. This one's kind of more in a Koan sense. Where does the path lead? Where does the path lead? This one's good because it approaches our sense of anticipation or expectation. If there's a sense of what awakening is like, if there's a sense of what this is leading to, if there's a sense that there's a goal or something to attain, that is going to be completely purely conceptual, and it's not going to happen that way. It just doesn't ever. This can't be predicted. So if there's a sense that this path leads somewhere, really pay attention to that, because it's already here. It can only be here. There is no future moment. Even though there's a sense that there may be a future moment, it's still right here, right now, just like this. And that's really all there's ever been. And so this path doesn't really lead anywhere, but this might be a nice place to kind of end it. The Alchemist is a wonderful book. Without giving away too many details, in The Alchemist, the main character, he ends up going on an adventure looking for something in particular. He's looking, and he travels far and wide. And by the end of the book, he returns all the way home. And when he comes home, that's when he finds the very thing that he's looking for. And the paradox arises that even though it was already right where he was the entire time, he still had to go on that adventure to find it at home. And that's what this path seems to be. That all of these things that you've experienced or have gone through are part of this path. And there is no such thing as a wrong turn. It's just more about just paying attention to what's right here, right now, what's tangible, what's palpable. And as you continue uncovering more and more layers of interpretation, you begin to see very clearly what this is. And the best part is, it seems to come along with quite a bit of well being, just a sense that everything's okay. And I'm sure that none of you can think of anything better than that. So I'm definitely here for you, and I really appreciate all of your support. And just thank you so much for allowing me to just continue to speak about nothing. All right, everyone. Have a good night. Talk to you soon.